This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Angie Speaks, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's really great to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and it's great to meet you as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with you as well. You recently released a book called Late Stage Babylon, Navigating the Post-Secular Spiritual Crises. And you offer a really, I think, fantastic analysis of contemporary situations, themes, from a Jungian perspective. And as we're chatting about before we started rolling here, one of the things that I want to promote on this podcast is a depth psychological perspective, because I think it helps guard us against ideological possession and divisiveness and othering and alienation and all of that stuff that is at the heart of a lot of the problems that we're facing these days. So it was really exciting for me and refreshing to see you, a younger person, I guess maybe a young millennial or late Gen
Baby
Zer.
millennial. Baby millennial.
Baby
32.
millennial.
Yeah, 32.
Yeah. To having your own experience as someone who was coming up on YouTube as a cultural commentator and a journalist, getting into Jung and doing what I think is like a really deep study of Jung, and then presenting this in a way, like, I love your writing style. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Normally with audiobooks, I find it really hard to listen to audiobooks that aren't read by the author, but I thought whoever produced the audio version of your book did a really fantastic job, and I really enjoyed the reader. So that's another plus.
Thank you so much. I went through a list of people before I settled on this specific reader, and I just loved her cadence, and I felt like she kind of felt like an extension of my own personality in certain ways. So I definitely really appreciate the job that was done with the audiobook, and I'm glad to hear you say that. And as for the Jungian aspect, it was actually the kind of madness of the current political climate that led me towards exploration of depth psychology, and also my experiences within the political realms. I was on the kind of like YouTube left when I first started, and I started to notice a lot of the pathology that was within that sphere. I then moved into some of the more dissident spheres, and I noticed a lot of the pathology within those spheres as well, and just the sort of general cultural malaise. There's a W.B. Yeats poem that I love called The Second Coming. And one of the lines in it is, the falcon has lost the falconer. The falcon representing humanity, and the falconer representing kind of like an axis mundi, or sight of meaning. And yeah, I feel like we're in a culture now where the falcon has definitely lost the falconer, to say that. And my interest in Jung when I was much younger was more kind of interpersonal psychology based. So I was interested in things like personality and the shadow. And I didn't necessarily come to a more macro or collective understanding of depth psychology until I became incredibly disillusioned and really disturbed by what I was seeing in the cultural climate. And I realized that some of the things that I had already kind of studied within the depth psychology corpus rang true when it came to explaining a lot of the pathology that I was seeing, whether it be in like the domain of politics or culture and identity, or even technological acceleration. It seemed as if something was constellating, something kind of beyond what modern forms of analysis could necessarily be useful in terms of grappling with the current moment. I felt like I had to get kind of occult and arcane and kind of look at the binary code running behind everything in that sense, and the archetypal forces that are currently driving the collective psyche. There was something incredibly empowering about having that kind of bird's eye view. It gave me, I guess, a level of detachment that really helped me not go crazy. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's kind of what led me there. Was a mixture of like previous interest in Jungian ideas and depth psychology, and then really seeing those dynamics play out in the public domain while attempting to do my work, basically.
Yeah, I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about what you are experiencing as someone that was part of this YouTube left. And when you talk about the dissident left, are you speaking to what I've heard referred to as the dirtbag left?
Well, I'll answer the first question first, because the labels can kind of get weird and messy or whatever, and it's something that I haven't necessarily paid much attention to or attempted to really brand myself with. I believe in individuation, and part of that is like divorcing from tribal identity and just kind of going with your essence and what you think is true. And that's always the dynamic that I've approached my work with. But of course, it's kind of gotten me into trouble with those who are more married and loyal to these tribal identities. But when I first started out, the YouTube left at the time was who kind of gravitated towards me, because I was doing kind of class-based analysis work, but with kind of a mystical depth psychology flair. So naturally, the sort of leftist audience was attracted to the type of content that I made. But very soon, I began to see dysfunctional dynamics, like, for instance, identity or identity signifiers taking precedence over actual character development and wholeness. Things like, rigid ideological possession. Things like people identifying entirely with the good to the point where they are now unconscious to their own capacity for evil. So I saw a lot of deep cruelty manifest. And the thing is, the people who were manifesting the cruelty thought that they were on the right side of history, therefore they were exempt from any kind of moral judgment. And just the sheer lack of moral clarity really disturbed me. And obviously, because I don't try to take these tribal identities seriously, I was kind of a target for a lot of hatred. And then, later on, there was sort of a dissident sphere that started to, come up. And it was people from all over the political spectrum who were kind of disaffected for one reason or another with sort of institutional power and the grip that institutional power had on these political constituencies. So you had people on the right who were more populist, for instance. You had people on the left who were like more, who were incredibly disillusioned with the way the left had capitulated to the neoliberal establishment, had allied itself with big tech, that kind of thing. So this dissident sphere kind of started to pop up, but even that fell prey to the same sort of pathologies and dynamics, and also the same kind of tribalism. So it was just a constant kind of witnessing these dynamics play themselves out, seeing how harmful and destructive they were, and how they also kind of were attempting to attack my own individuation in a way. It was almost like a soul attack, like, don't be yourself, be what the tribe wants you to be.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I also think my ethnicity played a role as well. Being a Black woman, there are certain things that are projected onto you by the collective. I like to say there are only 3 archetypes of Black women that the collective internet brain can compute. And it's the baddie, the activist, and the mammy. Those are like the three the 3 archetypes. So you have like the hypersexualized kind of baddie image. You have the activist who's like self-sacrificial and is kind of like the voice of moral clarity, or you have the mammy who kind of does the emotional labor for everybody. And I didn't really fit into any of those. I wasn't interested in fitting in any of those, and I was really sick of having those things projected onto me. I didn't feel like I could be a whole person, and so much of Jungian analysis and depth psychology is about the journey towards wholeness, towards finding out who you really are beyond tribal labels and affiliations, and also the projections of the collective. So yeah, trying to just like remain whole through attempting to engage in the cultural domain has been quite difficult and maddening. And yeah, depth psychology definitely gave me the language to understand what was going on, and also kind of a shield. Like I said, it helped me be a lot more emotionally detached from what I was seeing going on, more like watching specimens in like a zoo rather than being like caught up in the fray of the collective. Because at the end of the day, I'm myself. I don't really care about the projections of others, whether they be political labels or racial or gendered expectations. The fact that the kind of hive mind can't compute certain things isn't like my moral failing. It's a moral failing of the collective consciousness, sadly, which you see play out in many different domains. But yeah, these were the things, like looking at my dynamics and also the culture at whole, and seeing how things were really malfunctioning and how there wasn't really much space for being an individual with a soul. It's almost like you have to surrender your individual faculties to some kind of aesthetic or hive mind or tribal identity. And I just wasn't having it. Wasn't about it. And a lot of that stuff influenced the material within late stage Babylon. Yeah.
Yeah, I can really relate. And, people who aren't so public with their work like you and I are, I think experience this on a maybe a smaller level, this kind of pressure to conform or to join a tribe. But I've experienced that too. It's like if you're not a part of a clearly delineated tribe or identity, people get really upset. And, I've even experienced that too, like people expecting me to be one way or the other, or to take a side against one thing or the other. And I think, both my spiritual practice and my study of depth psychology has helped me stay apart from that, to extricate myself from the mass, and to, like you said, individuate and be myself, and be a free thinker. But man, the pressure is real.
Yes. And I think it's because the collective is more obsessed with what they view as perfection, to the point where they sacrifice wholeness. There isn't very much space within the cultural domain for people who are integrated and whole. It's very hard to be an intellectual as well as a Black woman that looks a certain way. That makes people's brains break. Or if you are, a person who looks like a hippie or whatever, people might expect you to hold certain political views because of that. Everything is so imbued with connotation now. And it really prevents people from being able to be themselves, as well as accept the complexity of others. And I really think it's because we wrestle not against flesh and blood, like we're dealing with like egregores here. A lot of people have traded individuation and soul development for group identity, because it does all the work for you. It gives you a personality, a collection of slogans, a community that's built in, whereas the path of individuation can be very lonely. And also you will have to deal with the backlash and the hostility from these egregores a lot of the time. So you become an enemy to everybody. People on both the left and the right completely despise me. And I haven't even done anything to them, which shows you the power of individuation. Just your very presence as a whole, complex person who hasn't been infested by the egregore is enough to cause scandal and problems. But it's because you're a reflection of what they've given up, basically.
Yeah, it's very challenging for them.
Yes. You're a reflection of what they've given up. So just your presence alone is almost like a insult and like narcissistic injury to not necessarily their ego, but the egregore that they've kind of given their soul over to. So it's even though, I have this detachment and stuff now, it's also, I still acknowledge that it's dangerous. Like it's actually a very dangerous time. It's gotten past the point now of a marketplace of ideas. It's more like a meat grinder for human souls. And And that's what I find the most terrifying about the current climate. If you're somebody who has an allegiance to wholeness, and complexity and nuance, there isn't a whole lot of space for you,
Mm,
sadly. And I think it's being done this way by design, by the powers that be in Silicon Valley, by political interests as well that benefit from this kind of fragmentation of the public consciousness. There are so many engines that drive this fragmentation that are beyond our control, sadly. And there also isn't enough counter information out there to show people that another way is possible. You don't have to give up your authenticity and your intuition and your sovereignty in order to be part of something that is essentially parasitic. Because I don't know if you notice when you see people who are infested by these egregores, there's like a hollowed out kind of grotesque energy
mm,
that I feel kind of incredibly spiritually allergic to.
mhm.
I don't know if you've experienced the same thing. But yeah, the egregore is
Yeah.
essentially parasitic, in my opinion. It's hollowing them out.
Yeah, I guess the way I often respond to that when I hear somebody just repeating the slogans of the group, I feel a kind of a dullness and a boredom. Like a part of my whole project as both a counselor and what I do here with the podcast is to celebrate individuality and diversity and eccentricity, all of these things that make humanity more interesting and more creative. So when I meet people who are clearly just repeating the slogans and kind of reciting the scripts and performing a particular identity, my soul has like an aesthetic, emotional response to that of just kind of like, oh,
Absolutely.
yeah. Hence
Absolutely.
my call for just more soul and more soulfulness.
Yeah.
And like what you're speaking to, the risk of standing apart from the crowd, that's very real as well, and very much behind the spirit of this podcast, Howl in the Wilderness. Feeling isolated and alone, and kind of howling your despair at what's happening to the world. As it's a kind of a protest, but it's also a call to the others to say like, hey, anybody else out there seeing what's wrong with this whole thing and wanting to maybe come together around exactly what you're speaking to, individuation, wholeness, authenticity, sovereignty, free thinking.
Mhm.
And so that's what I'm trying to do here. And I think what you're speaking to so eloquently is exactly behind the spirit of this whole project of mine.
Absolutely. And it's so important for the sort of, I guess, islands of sanity that you're creating to exist because they're so few and far between these days because the former option of surrendering yourself to the collective is far more easy and attractive, and it's also kind of digitally incentivized as well.
You're right. The algorithm loves a kind of a hot take or a polemic take or, yeah.
Yeah, and it loves a hive mind.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't like things that it can't categorize or control.
Mm-hmm.
And not just the algorithm, the egregore in and of itself, which is why I felt like I got so much hostility in these spaces, is because I'm not very easy to categorize. Like, I might have a take one day that you think sounds conservative, or one that sounds like super far left or whatever. That's just who I am, and that really pisses people off. But to me, that's like a sign of integration and wholeness. And like you said, this is such a important thing to beam out into the public consciousness now, because there are people out there who are also looking for, I guess, safety rafts
Mm-hmm.
from the flood of slop that has completely dominated the cultural domain. So even though it can be tough and demoralizing to be howling in the wilderness, you're doing God's work, I think, and I mean that in like a literal sense. People need to have somewhere to go when the noise of late stage Babylon gets too loud and overwhelming. And without things like this, it can be even more of a howl in the wilderness. So these little nodes of sanity, I think, are so important and really should be supported with everything. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that buying into a collective identity and worldview, what it gives you is a sense of security. Like you said, you're kind of handed everything in order to define yourself and your way of thinking. And on the other side of that, what's required is this ability to hold the tension of the opposites, to tolerate kind of ambivalence, ambiguity, complexity, uncertainty, and that requires a certain kind of inner strength. And I'm wondering for you, like beyond the ideas of Jung and depth psychology, where do you find that inner strength to be yourself and to speak your own mind?
I think it's thank you. I think it's the image of Christ, in all honesty. And not like as a dogma to be believed, but as a pattern to be followed. Christ is the ultimate symbol of the reconciliation of opposites for me. He had to reconcile being both divine and human. He was sort of the tension between like a divine destiny and human suffering. He was also, murdered by the crowd. He had to reconcile having immense love for humanity while also seeing its worst shadows. I find the image of Christ to be incredibly powerful for the current moment. And one of the things that Jung talked about was the fact that Western culture hadn't fully integrated the lesson of Christianity and of the Christ image. Just as in previous aeons, there were different God images that imparted certain lessons into the human collective. The image of Christ is one about holding the tension of opposites. It's one about mercy. It's one about mercy that's almost divine, because the human thing is might makes right, tribalism. That's what we want to do in our lizard brain. That's the natural response. But Christ as a symbol of the anthropos, the sort of blueprint of the evolved human being, is about standing in the gap of the impossible and creating a third thing. And that's why the true message of Christianity isn't about death and suffering. It's about the victory over matter, over the material world, over our base instincts through the divine act of holding the tension of opposites. So for me, not in a dogmatic way, but more in a way that's viewing the Christ image as a pattern to be followed. I think really internalizing that, it was incredibly healing for me. And I also think on a macro scale, looking at the Christ image stripped of dogma is also something that could be incredibly healing for Western culture in general, understanding what it truly means to sacrifice one's ego and really stand in the gap of holding the tension of opposites. That's the real alchemical working. That's where real magic and real change, like seismic change that shifts entire universes can be made. And I've seen this power work in my life. And late stage Babylon is a product of me attempting to hold that tension of opposites and follow that path. So for me, my spirituality, I consider myself a kind of Gnostic, Jungian, Christian mystic, looking at, the divine feminine in the form of Sophia, looking at the image of Christ as well. These things have been incredibly grounding for me within the current cultural moment, seeing these as blueprints for how to live and how to deal with what, the world views as irreconcilable. It's the transcendent function within depth psychology. Christ represents the transcendent function, the thing that comes about when, there's, irreconcilable poles. The collective psyche has inbuilt mechanisms that come to restore wholeness and order. And Christ is one node of that sacred mystery that has existed for aeons. So really and truly, yes, my spirituality is what keeps me grounded, and very much the idea of the servitor mundi and this transcendent function is something that gives me a lot of faith. because it's not just some abstract thing out there. You have the power to embody that when you stand in the gap and hold the tension of opposites yourself.
Yeah, you're kind of evoking for me some of the teachings of Rudolf Steiner and his whole trinity of Lucifer, Ahriman, and the Christ, and the Christ beyond just the man Jesus, but this force of unity, of I would say maybe like the middle way, the middle path. And you do bring together, to a certain extent, Jung and Steiner in your book, which I've always thought was just like a no-brainer. It's like, here are these two guys operating at the same time, contemporaries, and not really, they didn't engage a whole lot while they were alive, but I think that they do complement each other in a way. Jung kind of developing the science of the soul, and Steiner developing the science of the spirit.
Absolutely.
And yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say absolutely. William Blake, I think, belongs to that lineage as well.
Hmm.
I think Tolkien belongs to that lineage. I think C.S. Lewis, to an extent, belongs to that lineage as well. Even though there's a concept that W.B. Yeats as well. He speaks of the spiritus mundi, and it's sort of a proto idea of the collective unconscious. And I think the reason why there's so much congruence between these disparate characters in their work is because the spiritus mundi is speaking through them. It's what happens when you surrender your ego. Something more ancient comes up and begins to work through you, which is the great mystery that I think these different figures really tapped into, which is why there's so much similarity. And back to the Lucifer Ahriman Christ dichotomy, Steiner talked about how Christ sort of stood in the middle of Lucifer and Ahriman, who are these sort of two distortions of the human spirit. They're not like evil in the cartoon sense, but they're sort of necessary for human development. However, when one takes over the other, or there's too much emphasis put on one over the other, things become unbalanced. So for instance, Lucifer is sort of the revolutionary impulse that pulls us up from the earth and up into spirit. And you can definitely see the sort of Luciferic spirit on the left, for instance. And the danger of the Luciferic spirit when it's out of balance is that it can become narcissistic. It can become, earth hating, body hating. It can become completely untethered from moral reasoning and responsibility. And then on the
Right.
right,
And yeah, I just want to kind of stay with that for a moment. Something that I see on the left is this ascent into abstraction. Like
yes,
the
precisely.
ideology, it's a collection of very kind of abstract ideas with its own language that is so far from street level language that it becomes its own form of like elitist code. And so as a kind of a progressive liberal person, but also in some ways a very conservative person myself, trying to ally myself with the kind of the left, people who have gone through university and been indoctrinated into this ideology with its own language and codes. I found it very removed from material reality and like the class struggle that's at the heart of my own critique of culture, coming from a working class background. For me, that's why I like someone like Catherine Liu, who is speaking to, trying to bring back the class struggle as being central to leftist politics.
Yeah.
So yeah, just that kind of Luciferian, it can take us away from material circumstances and like what
Yes.
really matters.
Yes, it's inflation, a Luciferian inflation pride that leads people into these sort of abstractions and makes them reject the earth. You also see a lot of rejection of the body as well on the left, which ironically kind of feeds into transhumanism and those sorts of ideas. The idea, and also the idea that one can transcend the limits of biology, and that biology is something that is hateful and bad and should be eradicated, that sort of thing. But then conversely, on the right, you have a densification into matter, which is represented by Ahriman. Legalism, what's it called? Rigid sort of dogmatism, rigid social hierarchies, rigid materialism, things like racial ideologies as well, which don't look at the soul of a person, but try to quantify them on a sort of racial hierarchy. This is incredibly Ahrimanic thinking. So both of these nodes of the political spectrum are essentially possessed because they fail to hold the center. There is a benefit to abstract thinking at times. There's also a benefit to being rooted in the material. And the point of the rational actor, the anthropos, the human being, not the egregor or the demon, is to find a reconciliation, a balance that works. And I feel like that center that W.B. Yeats was talking about has completely gone out of whack. And there aren't enough people attempting to hold that center. All you see are people either falling into these rigid Ahrimanic ideologies that are densifying the worship of matter, the worship of materiality, or they've flown off into sort of Luciferian abstraction. And it's very, very dangerous, very incredibly dangerous. And that's why I think the image of Christ is so important in this current era. Because he was both divine and material. He was God on earth, but he also went through very human suffering, some of the worst kind of human suffering. So he had to hold the tension between the spiritual and the material. And that was really what made him divine. And that was why his divinity was recognized. So yeah, I think that's really the crux.
You're so articulate. I just kind of want to like feed you little prompts and just let you go off. Didn't you write that your mother was a preacher or a pastor in the Pentecostal church?
Yes, she was for many years. She's no longer. She's now a lawyer. But growing up, I grew up in the sort of bosom of the Pentecostal church, and I saw the same sort of counterfeit spirit that I saw on the left. The same kind of, identification with the good, to a point where it was justifying evil. The same kind of, zealotry and desire to break the bonds of matter. For instance, there's a lot of Zionism on the evangelical left, which is on the evangelical right, which is obviously playing out on the world stage now. The belief that, the coming of Christ is imminent and that we have to use material means in order to bring about this spiritual promise. There's something kind of incredibly antichrist coded about it, despite the fact that these people claim to be following Christ. But at the same time, my mom was a woman in the church. And we're also Nigerian, so Yoruba culture really deeply informed our version of worship. So even though the counterfeit spirit or the Ahrimanic spirit was present, so too was the truth, the real spirit. So my childhood had this like strange contradiction where I was both seeing mystical experience and sort of deep, earthy spirituality that involved the body and the whole heart and the whole soul, while also seeing these sort of Ahrimanic delusions at the same time. So I was kind of raised in a place where I was forced to reckon with the reconciliation of opposites from a very young age.
And doesn't the Pentecostal church often involve like incorporation of spirits and speaking of tongues and that kind of thing?
Yes. There's a lot of it is informed by African spirituality. Yoruba spirituality is very embodied, and it oftentimes people are mounted by spirits. So spirit possession is part of the Yoruba culture, but obviously through colonial kind of, I guess, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, through the sort of colonial influence of Christianity, these things kind of went underground. And one thing about Africans is that you cannot suppress that spirit. It's just part of who we are as a people. So even within Christianity, you still see these aspects come up, the sort of ecstatic worship that involves the whole body. And when I was young, I did have like spiritual experiences that were embodied. And there was something very special about that compared to Christianity that was like purely intellectual or, you know, very kind of somber and solemn. There was something very magical and charged about that energy, even
Oh
though there
yeah.
were predatory aspects lingering under the surface as well. Like I said, I was highly indoctrinated with Zionism as a child, and the idea that, you know, the coming of Christ was imminent. You know, I would have nightmares about, you know, waking up and the rapture having come. And then also just the idea was implanted into my head that, you know, what we did, our material feats, was what would bring around about the spiritual promise of Christ's return. And I saw how this germ of the desire to immanentize the eschaton, for instance, it didn't just exist on the religious right, it also exists on the left with the idea of the revolution. It's almost like that's kind of became a secularist eschaton that I saw while I was on the left. And, you know, anything justifies the revolution, and it's a purely material. It has nothing to do with moral or spiritual development. It's about these material means. And then also in the technological domain, now you have the idea of the singularity. Again, another material aspiration that doesn't take into account moral development, spiritual development. It's sort of purely based in materiality. And that was one of the things that Jung talked about. And not just Jung, Steiner talked about this. William Butler Yeats also talked about this, the idea that we're living in a time where the spirit of Ahriman, the more materializing, calcifying force, would incarnate in the form of the Antichrist. Not as a person, but as a general kind of cultural malaise, a cultural desire to make spiritual promises imminent through material means. And I see this kind of everywhere. It's not just a religious thing. It's also a technological thing. It's a political thing, even in the cult of Trump, for instance. Many viewed him as like a sort of messianic figure. You see the religious impulse being mixed into the political sphere in that sense. So really and truly, to me, the Antichrist, the opposite of the Christ energy that I'm talking about, the opposite of realizing that the kingdom of God is within, it's in how you treat your brother. It's not this abstract Luciferian kingdom or something that you can bring about by material Ahrimanic means. It's right here in the center where you're at. And yeah, I really feel like we're currently in deep spiritual danger because of this desire to make these spiritual promises imminent through either technological means, political means, or religious means. And these things tend to, again, ignore what really matters, the development of the soul, the development of the character, in favor of material actions, justifying, you know, wars and stealing land, you know, investing so much into the idea of the technological singularity and how this is going to help us escape the mortal coil, or political movements that, you know, devolve into egregors that, you know, crush the human capacity for reason and for soul. It's sort of this crazy quasi-Gnostic meme that has gone out of control. It's like the dark aspect of Gnosticism in a way, or Gnosticism perverted. And I see, that's kind of the thesis of Late Stage Babylon. It's me looking at how this desire has kind of gotten out of control, and how even though the Christ impulse is constellating in the collective unconscious, so too is this Antichrist impulse. And it's not one person, it's not one political movement, it's not one ideology. It's pretty much everywhere at this point. So yeah, that's kind of the thesis of the book.
Yeah, really well said.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You know, I hadn't thought about how on the left they're kind of enacting their own bringing about of the end times, but just cloaked in a kind of a social political garb, like you know, the collapse of the Western civilization to bring about some new kind of socialist utopia. Yeah, there's that same pattern
Yes.
playing
Yes.
itself out.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot lately about AI and transhumanism, and I'd love to hear your take on it. You do have a chapter on that topic in your book, but I wonder if you could just kind of get into that and how you view all of that as another kind of manifestation of these old impulses and patterns.
Absolutely. There are so many different examples. For instance, Peter Thiel, people like Elon Musk, they use explicitly messianic language when talking about technological acceleration. You also have factions on the right as well who view technological acceleration as a manifestation of these spiritual promises. So you have a lot of accelerationists on the right. The transhumanist impulse also, has taken root on the left, albeit in a less explicit form, but more in the sort of body rejecting idea that, the human biology is superfluous and you can do whatever the hell you want to it. It sort of acts as a precursor to transhumanism. On the right, you have this popular figure who's kind of in the zeitgeist at the moment called Clavicular, and he's sort of the
Oh, is he
mascot
right? Is
of.
he the looks maxer guy?
Yes. And it's the same kind of the body is superfluous. It's biohacking, the idea that your body is sort of like a meat suit to be optimized.
Right, like the Brian Johnsons of the world.
Yes. I see this as
Right.
explicitly antichrist, explicitly anti-anthropos or anthroposophical behaviors. This is incredibly Ahrimanic because again, it ignores the development of the soul in favor for these material outward signifiers. And it's the same thing with Silicon Valley. Many of them, came about in the sort of rationalist movement that used to kind of dominate Silicon Valley thought. Things like effective altruism, those sorts of philosophies that saw, the total quantification of things, obsession with data, what I like to call confusing the map for the territory. Because it's one thing to have the map, it's another thing to actually have walked and experienced the territory. I think this is kind of a disease in the Western psyche, is confusing the map for the actual territory. It goes back all the way to kind of colonialist thought. But I digress. They kind of became spiritually alienated through their obsession with data, and their kind of untethering from like human values. They started to kind of think like machines. They everything's about optimization. Everything is about trying to make number go up. And then you sort of had the post-rationalist movement, which came about due to the spiritual alienation that a lot of these sort of Silicon Valley people were experiencing, where they kind of married Luciferian Gnosticism, the idea of technology enabling us to kind of escape the mortal coil or create utopia, along with the sort of Ahrimanic material reductionism within rationalism. So what you kind of see within the right wing Silicon Valley technological accelerationist constituency is two incredibly distorted poles of the human experience that have kind of married into this demonic chimera. And again, what I find sinister about it, I'm not like a Luddite. I think technology is a tool. And I'm not against people using technology. It's great. It's, done many wonderful things for the human experience. What I am against is ignoring moral and spiritual development in favor of these materialist promises of utopia. What you end up creating is a kind of psychopathic, spiritually devoid environment when spiritual development and moral clarity and moral development is ignored in favor of technological acceleration, which is really what you're seeing these Silicon Valley giants pushing. And it's not an eschaton. It's a hell, in my opinion. That they're bringing about a hell. To me, this is one of the many nodes of the Antichrist energy, the counterfeit spirit, as Jung calls it, that I speak about in Late Stage Babylon. This is again that archetype constellating, and it's anti-anthropos. Christ is the symbol of the anthropos. He didn't try to escape. He transcended the limitations of matter through personal sacrifice and attempting to reconcile the opposites, not by putting on a robot suit. The sort of thing I love about, the Jungian corpus is that it brings to mind and to soul the idea that the split between matter and spirit is actually quite thin. It's porous. Whenever you experience a synchronicity, for instance, when something within your inner world all of a sudden matches your outer world, you're experiencing the unos mundos, the unification, the singularity. You can experience the singularity right now without any technology whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It's real, it's here. And I feel like people have forgotten that the singularity, the eschaton, these are spiritual promises. These have nothing to do with attempting to transcend matter through material means. The transcendence of matter comes from understanding that the line between spirit and matter really doesn't exist, which is why Christ, submitted himself to die, because his physical body wasn't the thing. It was the message that it sent out. What his sacrifice represented was what made him immortal, was what deified him in that sense. It had nothing to do with, him becoming, the warlord that people wanted him to be and getting revenge, political revenge against the Roman Empire. That's the reason why I find the image of Christ so stimulating, because again, the people who surrounded him expected him to be the leader of a political eschaton, to be a political leader. Instead, he suffered and died. I think that's so powerful in a time where people are attempting to use either political or technological means to escape the rough and dirty work of being a human being. This is the true transcendence. This is where the true alchemical gold is cooked up. And it's as if people want to escape that alchemical process in order to get ill-gotten transcendence. And it doesn't lead to transcendence, it leads to further fragmentation. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, there's something to that, what you're laying out there, the kind of paradox of the technological transhumanists. There's this impulse that we can escape the limitations of materiality and the human body, but it's all done in a way that is so fixed by a materialistic mindset, in a way. Like, so on one hand, it's Luciferic, on the other hand, it's Ahrimanic. And what they're missing is the path of spiritual development.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. I mean, okay, Peter Thiel, I guess, has been going around doing this lecture on the Antichrist. Now,
the irony could make the universe fold in on itself.
now, I haven't seen or heard any of it, like what he's actually talking about, and I wonder if that's something that you've checked out. And I wonder if what's he talking about here?
All I hear is the voice of Ahriman whenever he speaks. Like, I literally think he's like a son of Yaldabaoth, like he's literally a son of Ahriman. But I digress. Personal attacks aside, he's basically trying to reconcile Christian theology with technological accelerationism. And I mean, you already see this on the sort of dissident right that he's kind of the king of, this sort of utilitarian approach to things like Catholicism and religion. They're not really interested in actual, like, true soul level conviction or soul level transformation, which is really what spirituality and religion is about, is a true transformation of one's inner world, inner being. Rather, they're interested in the utility of religion. So the community benefits, the social structures that it creates, that sort of thing. So there was already kind of an Ahrimanic approach to religion to begin with in these circles. But now it's sort of married itself in a strange Ahrimanic demonic marriage to the technological kind of singularity accelerationist constituency. And basically his whole idea is that, like, the promises of religion can be made effective by technological acceleration, and that we have a moral duty to accelerate technology to its, like, most absurd degree, damn whatever consequences occur, because we're actually leading towards this higher eschatological aim. It's like something out of a cyberpunk anime. It's like super weird and like it sounds like fiction, but it's happening, guys. It's here. And I think,
Mhm.
not that I think Peter Thiel is the Antichrist, but I think that archetype is definitely constellated around him and his constituency in the same way that you see it on the left. In the same way that I would even say the evangelical church also has, and Zionists are also being led by the Antichrist impulse because they, again, want to immanentize the eschaton through war and conquest. I think all of these different things are being kind of led by the same archetypal force. Even though they all hate each other and they all think they have nothing in common, they're actually being
Yeah.
driven by the same sort of Saturnian demiurgic antichrist force, in my opinion.
Right, and they're kind of literalizing it in different ways, but they're literalizing that same movement or impulse. On one hand, like there's a lot of people who are supporting the conflict in the Middle East right now because they think it will immanentize the eschaton and bring about the end times, which they're all praying for. Because on the other side of that is this idea of the new world, the new Jerusalem. And yeah, it does seem like the techno optimists, whatever we want to call them, are pushing toward the same thing. But in, yeah, I guess in a more Luciferic kind of way.
Yes, yes. And it's all, they both overlook moral development,
Right.
spiritual development, or the consequences, the human weight of the consequences of what they're doing, because the ends justify the means. When you identify purely with the good, you overlook your own capacity for evil.
Mhm.
And therefore, evil constellates even more. So that's what's demonic and kind of antichrist about all of these different things, whether it be the sort of a leftist kind of political revolutionary eschaton that's divorced from moral or spiritual development, or a religious eschaton or a technological eschaton. They're all kind of working with they're all being ruled by the same archetype, in my opinion. And yeah, the thing that like kind of links them together is their lack of moral reasoning or grounding. I mean, even with technological acceleration, the sheer consequences of unethical artificial intelligence or algorithms that like feed on outrage and division like we were talking about before, they don't care about any of that. They're just like accelerate to the moon because the eschaton is imminent. And it's this really psychopathic mind virus in a way that's kind of colonized some of the most powerful circles in the world. And I think people should definitely be way more weary and should also deeply push back against it, and
Mhm.
reassert the anthropos, the human, the Christ impulse. And I also think part of that is people beginning to realize that the membrane between matter and spirit is kind of thin, and that
Mhm.
you can experience the eschaton where you are right now. It's not, you don't have to go to space or wear a suit. And that's really the hope at the end of the tunnel for me. But yeah, in the meantime, we're kind of left with these psychopaths in all different suits. And I'm not saying they're psychopaths like congenitally or innately, but the sort of possession they're under is making them behave in a psychopathic manner. Yeah, it's very frightening.
Mhm. Yeah, because kind of built into that whole mythology is that only a chosen few will make it through the apocalypse. So all of the concern about the consequences of technological development, the depletion of water sources and all of that stuff, like you said, it's all a means to the end. And if, millions of lives are lost, well, so be it.
Yes, it's deeply anti-human,
Yeah, right.
very deeply anti-human. And again, the Christ impulse is the exact opposite of might makes right. He could have easily become a warlord. He had like a following of devoted followers or whatever. But he chose the path of the most deeply human thing possible, which is to suffer and die. And I think that that's what these people are truly afraid of is the muck of being a human being. But that's the alchemical crucible that the soul is being put through in order to reach true divinity. In order to reach true divinity, you have to live a life within matter and reconcile the opposites. That's the true path to the eschaton right there. That's the true path to the New Jerusalem or the singularity or whatever the hell you want to call it. But they kind of want to bypass that alchemical crucible and claim kind of false providence. And it's very frightening, incredibly frightening. And also it's a spiritual distortion, just from a sort of spiritual kind of alchemical perspective. It's a complete inverse of the alchemical process. And I think people have forgotten that that's why we're here. That's what we're going through. That's what the soul is going through. Is the soul's journey towards individuation requires suffering, sacrifice, humility, all of the things that the Christ image represents. And that stuff is hard, and it's also a lot. It takes a lot longer to achieve the aim as well. And people want it now. We live in a culture of instant gratification. So the idea of going through the alchemical crucible and dealing with the muck and the filth and the hardship of being a human, it's not very appealing, even though it's the most rewarding process. People don't necessarily see it that way, especially these people who are, again, usually incredibly privileged, incredibly kind of lost in abstractions. They're completely untethered from the earth, from the muck of working like a normal job, of, being a hands-on parent instead of just like a weird incubator like Elon Musk is with his harem of women or whatever. Yeah. Even that, like reducing the sort of relationship to the child to this sort of material pro-natalist thing, that's demonic in my opinion. Deeply so. A child is to be loved. They're not just an object for your ego or your desire for some kind of, dominance or longevity. These people are they've totally severed themselves from the anthropos. They've become post-human, even without augmentation, because all that grounds one to humanity often involves work and labor and suffering and sacrifice. Yeah, and they don't really want to do that. And I think this is a problem, not just with the sort of techno right, but all over the sort of culture at the moment, is this sort of disdain for the human.
Man. Yeah. I mean, you're really kind of laying it all out in a very clear and articulate way.
Thank you.
Yeah. What do you think about the whole, what I see as a kind of a regressive move to traditionalist Christianity at this time? Because, you're someone who came from a devoutly Christian background, and you somehow come through that into your own understanding of things, but you haven't like thrown the baby Jesus out with the dirty bathwater.
Great way of putting it. Great way of putting it.
Because, as we see with Christianity, they have turned Jesus into the holy warrior. I mean, they've kind of co-opted Christianity for whatever means that empire wants to enact, right? From Constantine onward, St. Paul onward. And so, like, what do you think about this whole, the revival of Orthodox Christianity among, kind of intellectual, cultural elites? What do you think's going on there? And is it something that it concerns you?
Big time. Like I said in the beginning, the falcon has lost the falconer. These people are hollow. They're the hollow men. They don't have any internal conviction, and they're not interested in the inner transformation that truly engaging with religion or religious symbols causes within. Most of the time, they're only interested in the utilitarian material aspects, whether it be the aesthetics, the community that's sort of inbuilt. They're sort of using it as the egregors that we've been talking about previously. The inbuilt community, the inbuilt ideology, the inbuilt sense of purpose. It's purely utilitarian to many of these people. It has nothing to do with actual inner transformation. They haven't had their Paul on the road to Damascus realization or anything along those lines. It's counterfeit. And I think it's really fitting that Jung calls it the counterfeit spirit. To me, this sort of mass revival, despite the fact that it uses the image of Christ, is highly anti-Christ coded. because it's materialistic. It has nothing to do with actual spiritual or moral development. These are the same people who will, tweet about Christ or whatever in one breath, but then, share racist AI memes in another. They have no inner core. They're hollowed out individuals. And especially in America where, things like lynchings occurred, how they don't see the correlation between the lynched man and Christ, how the same people who held up the image of Christ lynched human beings, and they don't see the correlation between those images. It is the opposite of Christ. It is Antichrist in its most visceral form. And it's an insult to the spiritual impulse. And I say that in the strongest terms possible because I've been around a lot of these people and I see right through the bullshit, right through it. It's nothing to do with spiritual transformation. As Christ said, by their fruits you will know them. Many people profess the name of Christ, but they don't have the spiritual fruits. They don't show the spiritual fruits of someone who's actually been transformed by the God image. When you interact with a God image, you are inevitably transformed by it if you're doing it in a way that's meaningful. And I don't see any of the fruits of Christ in these people. I see them as purely aesthetic, kind of cultural tourists in a way. And again, it's a trend. It's something to hop on. These same people were on the left 5 years ago, screaming about trans issues or, class politics or whatever. And now, because they're a little bit disillusioned with that, they're looking for a new tent and a new aesthetic and a new identity to fall under. But you can tell when something is authentic and when it's a counterfeit. And these people are being puppeted by the counterfeit spirit. They do not worship Christ. Like in the story of Christ, when he speaks to the Pharisees, he says, you do not worship the Father, you worship the God of this world. And the God of the material world is Yaldabaoth, Saturn, Ahriman. That's the archetype that rules over the material plane. That is their God. It has nothing to do with the monad or the transcendent or the Father. They worship the God of this world. That is who rules over them. It has nothing to do with Christ or the image of Christ, and they've not internalized it. And it's not just these people. I think Western culture at large has not really come to the realization of what the Christ image is really about and internalized it. So now that's why we're having this antichrist cultural swing. Within depth psychology, it's called enantiodromia. When you identify too much with one side of a pole, the other side inevitably comes. So people only identified with the sort of image of Christ in a very shallow way. So now this antichrist constellation is beginning to sort of develop within the collective psyche. And yeah, I think this sort of false revivalism is definitely a node of that counterfeit spiritual energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that we can observe when influencers convert to Christianity, it's, I think, like you said earlier, you're tapping into an inbuilt audience and league of followers.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find curious is how kind of thirsty these online Christians are for a new representative or convert to come into the fold. Like it's like when I see somebody convert, it's like the online Christians are just magnetized to that person, and they fill up the comments, and so then they feed the algorithm. And so I understand what the kind of the grifter Christian convert is getting from that. Obviously, they get like a kind of a renewed career out of it oftentimes. But what do you think the followers are getting out of these people, famous people converting?
Yeah.
Like, why do they get so excited about it?
Because they're idol worshippers. Again, they have no connection to real transcendent spiritual experience, so they need a material representative to project onto. And I really think that that's what's going on there, which is why you see like the Trump worship, or for instance, someone like Russell Brand and his kind of like band of camp followers or whatever. They need like a material person to project their spiritual impulses onto, because they're not spiritual people. They are not, transcendent. They worship the god of this world. And also,
Well,
I think the glamour of celebrity also plays
yeah,
a role in it as well. Again, celebrity is an incredibly materialistic thing. And I don't think they feel like their Christianity is relevant unless it has some kind of cultural capital attached to
right. That's what I was, where I'm kind of going with it too, is that they're still under the thrall of celebrity,
Yes.
and that a celebrity converting to Christianity is affirming of their own kind of tenuous faith that isn't rooted in real gnosis.
Yes. In
Yeah.
real gnosis and real inner transformation, because gnosis also comes with metanoia, and metanoia is about inner transformation. So that no, they're not. They don't have any gnosis. They are just, again, worshiping the god of this world. It has nothing to do with the transcendent principle or function. And yes, celebrity gives them the sort of reassurance that they're on the right path, because this person who's materially shiny and materially wealthy is now, parroting the same talking points as me. So therefore, I feel better about my faith when it should really have nothing to do with that at all. But
Yeah.
again, these people, the celebrities themselves, sort of act as hosts for the counterfeit spirit themselves. So yeah, it's very Antichrist coded, and I think it's really interesting in the sort of stories of the Antichrist, whether it be in the Bible. It's always sort of a charismatic leader or figure, and you just see how the collective consciousness is already primed for this energy to invade. I don't think it's one, like I said, one person. I think it's like a constellation of ideologies, things, people, and I think the collective unconscious is primed for it because of this lack of connection to the transcendent principle. So therefore, any material shiny thing that comes along speaking spiritual language looks good, and that is the trick of the counterfeit spirit.
Yeah, the anti-memon pneuma, the counterfeit
Yes.
spirit. That's a notion that Jung got from Gnosticism. And now we haven't spoken about another Gnostic figure. I think you mentioned briefly, but Sophia, wisdom, this feminine spirit of wisdom, god of wisdom. Where might she fit into this whole picture?
Ooh, now we're getting to my favorite part. Now that we've talked about all the doom and gloom,
Yes, please.
now we need to talk about the
What's the
solution.
way out or the way
Yes,
through?
yes, yes, yes.
To watch or listen to the full episode, become a free or paid member by visiting patreon.com/howl in the wilderness, or by downloading the Patreon app to your mobile device. Paid memberships start at just $5 a month and offer a number of benefits, including early access to all episodes, the full podcast archives, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting an independent creator directly. Thanks.